Rebecca Petto. I am the Dean at the London Institute of Banking and Finance. And today it is my pleasure to welcome Jill Hayter, who will be sharing her thoughts with us on remote working. So firstly, a few housekeeping rules, if I may. You will be muted, and we kindly ask you to keep your webcam turned off. You can ask questions all along the session in the chat box. There will be a Q&A session at the end, and the seminar is being recorded, and you will be able to watch it on our website. So I'm actually slightly curious, where are you joining us from today? So we could use the chat for your answers, please. Hello, Bangladesh, Cambridge, England, Kent, London, Cambridge, Surrey. Okay, lots of people from the UK, Scotland, Crediton, Bangladesh, Malta, Liverpool, Leicester, Bahrain. Fantastic. Oh, the Netherlands. Hello, everyone. That's such a great audience today. Thank you so much for joining us. So I would like to now, and without further ado, to introduce our speaker, Jill Hayter, and she's going to be sharing with us her reflections on the impact and future of remote working. Over to you, Jill. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, and welcome to everyone. And a big thank you to you for joining our seminar for the next hour. I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I'm going to be taking you through what we're going to be looking at for the next 60 minutes. I said that I'll be talking for some time, but then I'm really keen for any questions that you can put in the chat, as Maria said, and we'll have a session to look at those at the end of my session. So, interesting start, just 1 second. Sorry about that. So let's just talk about where I'm coming from, because I'm delighted to hear we have many participants from the UK. Further afield, I saw Malta, Bangladesh, and the first hello was from Maryland in the USA. So I'm calling you today from a village called Hatfield Peveril. I've put your postcard, it makes it look very pretty, but actually they are the highlights of our village. And I'm in the southeast of the United Kingdom. So what has Hatfield Peveril got to offer that may not be on offer in Maryland or other places that are calling in? Well, we are famous for really only one thing, and actually that's witchcraft. No comments, because we were famed for the first woman that was sadly ever executed for witchcraft in 1566. It didn't help that Agnes Waterhouse, who was the first lady, she was one of a number of women in our village that lost their life. She had a cat that she named Satan. So already things weren't really put in her favour when she decided to name her cat. But actually the records of her trial and then reports of her death and other deaths are actually still available in our local library, and you can go down and see what was the most amazing and terribly biased trials that perhaps you'll see. But that is what Hatfield Peveril is famous for, and it is still a sort of renowned for witchcraft and areas within it. So away from those two, let's get on to what we're going to be looking at today, which is not what we are doing in my area, but what we're all doing currently all over the world, and that is predominantly working remotely. So today's session, I'm going to present to you a mix of academic research. I'm going to talk about the COVID effect and some lessons we are learning anecdotally and which are being researched because of the COVID pandemic. And I'm also going to give you some practical advice because one of my key areas is actually training teams in working remotely. So I'm going to give you some advice. I do know that the team will be able to send you out a copy of an ebook if you're interested. I wrote that at the start of the COVID lockdown, and anyone is welcome to have a copy. I can actually hear somebody's microphone is on, so hopefully if you could all silence that, that would be super. But Eventually what I want to look at is the short-term viability versus the long-term reality, looking at the examples that I'm going to be giving you. Particularly a couple of areas that the research is going to focus on: productivity and also whether the benefits are overestimated. So let's get on to that. And of course, why do I think I've got any right to talk about working remotely when we are all doing it and experience, or most of us are doing it and experience it at the moment? Well, I started my interest in around about 2012, and I will take a couple of minutes just to say that I know I had my first sort of light bulb moment about working remotely, and it was a personal experience. I had an epiphany on a Sunday night. I'd come back from 2 weeks traveling, around Vietnam. We'd been backpacking. We were exhausted. On the Monday morning, we all had to get up early. I had to go to work, had to drag my kids and put them in their sports club because it was the holidays. 3 hours into it, I get a call to say somebody had broken a finger. And as I sat in the accident emergency room, I suddenly thought, I have 5 weeks of school holidays and they can't go to any more sports clubs because one of them has a broken finger. And in our house, it's one does, all does, so whether they wanted to go to these clubs, they were still going. I then started thinking, well, how are we going to work this? I could work my job around being flexible at home. I spoke to my boss, who said, no, you had to be into the office. And then a couple of days later, another trip to A&E just to have a further x-ray. And I was 2 minutes late into the office, bearing in mind, like most people, we all work extended hours. 2 minutes late. So on the second minute, I get a phone call to say, where are you? Bearing in mind that, I was a pretty senior manager in this organisation. I said, well, if you look down, I'm just actually paying for the meter outside work. And that really started my epiphany of, I don't need to be working in this office. I can do my job effectively from anywhere because I'm developing training products. I need to be, talking with clients, but I don't need to be doing it from my office. And also, as a senior manager, I had a very, very large workspace, all the kit. But because I was working 3 days, I was a part-time worker for them. Actually, 2 days, my desk was empty and they were just paying for time that, space that wasn't needed. So it started me thinking about, me wanting to work flexibly and what perhaps could be better for the organisation. Well, after a period of working remotely, I decided this is, I want to work totally flexibly. And I started my business in 2013, as you see on the screen. So I started Reboot. And after 3 years, I had discovered that because where I worked predominantly with organisations that have problems within the workplace. So I work to improve performance, support resolving of issues, etc., individual and team performance. And I was training a lot of people in problems that were created by working remotely. And so I developed a specific product that I do and still use today on working remotely. And if you look at my LinkedIn profile, my address is down there because I'm always happy to engage conversations about remote working. And I set out around a couple of years ago, 2019, and said, actually, this is my mission. My mission is to help people free themselves from the office, giving them the tools to do it, and let them sort of embrace the joy of flexible working that I have embraced and a lot of other people have as well. And my aim is by 2022, 10,000 people will have engaged with me somehow, some form, training, conversations, reading the ebook, whatever. So I am passionately supporting working remotely, but it has to be based on evidence. It has to be suited to the job and the person. And of course, it has to be academically verified as well. So this is some of the elements I want to talk about today. So, let's go into the background of problems that we might have experienced. I certainly experience in the areas that I'm working on, because I bridge both academia and the business world with Reboot. And I've just pulled out 6 of the main, but there are many. And I think most of us will have sort of come into contact or heard about some of these elements. And the first one is trust versus suspicion. People want to be trusted. We say we trust our staff, but when they're working from home, are we a bit suspicious about whether or not they're fully working? Do we have an inherent distrust that when you're out of sight, you really aren't doing the same as if you were sat in front of me. You know, are you working as effectively? You know, I've heard the phrase many times, shirking from home. So you're not doing the work instead of working from home. And perhaps all of us have experienced sat in an office and perhaps, you know, seeing, you know, perhaps we might be scrolling through Facebook when we shouldn't be, and seeing somebody who's on a bike ride, or somebody who has just sort of said, oh, I played 18 holes this afternoon. And you're thinking, weren't they working, or were they on a day off? I'm not too sure. So there's the inherent trust that we should be having in our teams against the suspicion that maybe our teams aren't working as hard, or that they might be a little too flexible in what they're doing. From a worker's perspective, there's the lost worker syndrome. People feeling because they're working flexibly or distance, they're not seen that often. Therefore, they're not forefront in the mind when it comes to promotion, you know, taking on products, taking up projects, taking on extra responsibilities. Also, when you have people working distantly, you don't have the huddle effect. You know, you might have a team member who says, can everyone come round? I just want to bounce a few ideas. The conversation over the water cooler that actually sparks a little idea. And I'm going to be talking about a chance conversation that sort of started building up some academic evidence. If you are a senior manager in an organisation, are you really confident that your remote workers understand your strategy, the changes that you might be implementing, even the requirements of the job and what their responsibility is? That can be really particular if you have members of your team who are actually working in other companies. You may be outsourcing your business, and you may have staff who are working at, you know, other offices, other companies, etc. Are you really sure that they understand, you know, your company ethos? And I'll talk a bit about corporate culture later on. Now, something that is becoming far more recognised as the pandemic lockdown has continued has been loneliness and isolation. This was always an issue, but I think it's come to the real fore. You know, people miss social contact. And of course, people are working remotely currently without other social contact. You know, wherever you are in the world, there may have been some element where you have been in your house. You know, you could have been in your house for a couple of days and only spoken to the people around you. Or your only contact is every hour, on the hour, you're on a different Zoom call with somebody else. And you're sort of in the habit of saying, how are you? Yes, I'm fine. It's all great. We're bored, whatever. But then you get on with your work. So loneliness and isolation can be a significant element here. Now, if I was to ask you about health and safety when you're working from home, some people might say, does that mean my line manager has to come and look at my house to make sure it's safe? Because I don't want my line manager anywhere near looking at my, you know, my personal surroundings. But it is quite a significant problem. You know, in all countries, there are legislation on the health and safety of employees, and therefore they have an obligation to ensure that you are safe and healthy within your workplace. At the moment, when we work from home, you know, did you know you should be able to demonstrate that your team have a fire evacuation plan? Now, for all of us, it would either, you know, possibly out the window or out the back, but actually, if you're working remotely in a high rise, you need to identify to your line manager that you know where the exits are and what you're doing. And all these things have sort of been swept away because of the urgency of lockdown. And finally, development opportunities. I mentioned that in Lost Workers. A lot of people really think that, you know, if I go remotely, that's it, I'm forgotten. And it's the people who are right in front of the those recruiting for the next job that become the ones that are first thought of when we need it. So these are just a few of the areas when we're working flexibly or in different locations or working from home. So I want to give you an example of some academic research that has been done, and I'm going to give you some more, and of course these are referenced at the end if you want to have a look at them in more detail. Now, a chance conversation on real estate prices in Shanghai. Now, this occurred when the CEO of Ctrip, which is a Chinese travel agency, it's a NASDAQ listed organization, now known as Trip.com Group. CEO had a conversation with the professor, Nicholas Bloom, at Stanford, and they were talking about the prices. You know, it's really expensive, my organization, with my real estate. And that sort of sparked the idea of not only doing a remote working experiment, but for it to be academically assessed. And that was done by a group from Stanford University in the USA, headed by Nicholas Bloom. And that work was done, well, maybe 7 years now, and the main work came out a couple of years later. And this formed what, there are other studies, but this formed a key study in starting to say, can we account for the productivity changes? Intuitively, we think this might be better for people. We think it's better that they save money, they're not traveling, there's less pollution through cars, use of trains, etc. But is it really better from an organizational point of view? So this company at the time had 16,000 employees. They chose only staff with over 6 months tenure. So they understood the job, by that stage, they knew what they were doing. And they chose the call centre. Now that's staff. Now that's significant because of course that is work that is easily transferable to another system as long as you've got the telecommunications. So we do understand there are drawbacks for a lot of these studies. So one of them is this one. 500 people volunteered, 249 were randomly assigned. So just because they volunteered, they didn't get to go on the trial. And they were given remote working for 9 months. This did include for them, though, 4 days at home, 1 day in the office. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a couple of the concerns. Some of them were the ones that I mentioned in previous slides. Concerns about shirking, and that was a word that was used, that there would be reduced productivity because the people weren't going to be doing the job they should be doing. A very interesting concern that was raised by senior management in this programme was actually the age profile of the workers, because they had a lot of what I would say younger, but we're talking sort of under 30s. And they were worried that this generation of workers, sort of X, Y, and Generation Z, wouldn't be able to manage themselves. Now, these were their issues. Whether or not we agree with it, these were issues that were honestly shared at the start. They hadn't been long enough in the workplace to really have that self-determination and be self-directing. So that was a huge concern. From the staff, they were worried about isolation. These were volunteers, but they still said they might be worried. And they were also worried about their promotion chances, amongst other concerns that were raised. So with the 4 days off working at home and 1 day in the office, which organised a reconfiguration of office space, turnover was reduced by 50%. On average, they saved $400 a worker. That doesn't seem a vast amount, but bearing in mind wage parity, and it was 5 years ago. They saved per worker £1,200 on their office space that was used. They then said after 9 months, you've got the choice, come back to the office or remain. Now, 50% returned to the work site, which is possibly a surprise to you. That's, if there were people that wanted to work from home, why only 50%? And I'm going to talk about that shortly as well. 35% took the option to extend, and we had a 15% of they weren't very sure. So they're the highlight figures. In their interviews, many staff felt lonely and isolated while doing it. And this links with some evidence that I'm going to talk about with regard to looking at evidence for remote work. And if we look on this, 4 major studies, the Bloom example, which I've just highlighted at C-TRIP, they had a 13% improvement in productivity as measured in the academic study. 9% of this was attributable to improved work rate, more output per minute's work. Staff said they had an increased satisfaction with their work, and the attrition rate decreased considerably. In the Sherman report, again, these are all references, self-rated performance improvement figures showed a significant increase. People assessed that their work rate was significant in that. Chowdhury, Forage and Larson said that they accounted for a 4% improvement in productivity. That was also associated with a $38 million saving. That was when the US Patents and Trading Office went to a you can work anywhere scheme. So they had had remote working, but they actually started to employ people throughout the United States and had a considerable capital saving in that. And the fourth report I want to highlight, which is Maz and Palais, they highlighted actually the huge inequalities within alternative work arrangements. And if you're interested in this specific area, that's an academic study into working mothers and non-working mothers who wanted to return to work. So that gave a different aspect on working from home. However, what all these reports, given the caveats, could demonstrate an increase in productivity to some level. Now, actually, what I've referenced at the end of the slideshow, which you'll see afterwards, is a really good and recent report by Dr. Matt Clancy on the case for remote work. And in that, it's a good compilation of a lot of studies, so you can see from different aspects. For those of you listening in that are academics, gives some really strong evidence about working remotely, not reducing the input and the outputs from academic collaborations. It gives a lot of details about studies that have been done about the expanding workplace and talent pool, that of course, when you work remotely, your staff can come from anywhere. So that's a very interesting and good summary. And as I said, that's highlighted. But these would be seen as the four main academic studies that I'd like to highlight today. So I'd like to do a quick poll while we digest some of the academic information. And that question is your attitude to remote work, as long as you do your job, that's fine? And it's a simple yes and no that's going to be coming up on your screen, because I'm really keen to hear, do you like the laissez-faire approach to management? And if you have that approach, are you happy to do that with your remote workers as well? So I don't care if they work from 2 in the morning till 10 o'clock in the morning. If it fits in their life, that's fine. Or I don't mind if they just come on and do 3 hours and then 3 hours in the evening, or they spread it around the week. So I can see that sort of some results are coming in. At the moment, it's massively in favour of, yes, I agree with the statement, as long as you do your job, that's fine. So what's interesting in that, currently it's at 80% say yes and 20% say no. So hopefully the results will come up on the screen. There's still people still voting, but yes, 81% have said yes, I agree with that, and 19% have said no, I don't agree with that. Well, I should have shared it. I'm sorry. So one thing that I feel on that is that I totally disagree with 81% of the people that are listening in, which is incredibly rude of me, because I personally do not believe that as long as you're doing your job, that's fine. And I'm going to explain to you why I take that stance. PC is a bit slow today, I do apologise. So I'm going to give you 4 examples of why I do not agree that just leaving people to get on their job, and as long as they do it, output driven, that's fine. So you might also think that makes me a very suspicious person and I don't have trust in the people I work with. Well, I want to give you evidence for why I think we should be ensuring that people are doing their job and how we do it. So there are 4 things that I'm going to say. It was all going so well. As long as they did their job, that was fine. Until there was an accident. Now, I hate to be boring about this, but I've already mentioned safety at work, and I'm going to mention it in about 10 minutes time as well. Very dull of me at all. But actually, if I fell over at work carrying a big box, we'd have an accident investigation. Somebody would check that I was all right. We'd make sure we'd put in place a risk management plan that this didn't happen again. What happens if I'm popping to the post office to pick up the earphones that work have sent me, but I couldn't answer the doorbell when the postal person knocked on the door because I was on another call. So I've just popped to the post office and I've had an accident on the way to that post office. Is that a workplace accident? Oh, I don't, we're starting to get a little bit confused about where's the workplace. Is it right in front of me now? My computer, my screen, and the things around me. So if you can't define where the workplace is, if you haven't put anything in place to say, this is what we consider the workplace, this is a workplace activity, you can become a bit unstuck. Now, obviously, I've given a little bit of an exaggerated example, but actually I do go to the post office to pick up things for my employer or etc. So actually that might be, and also, do I do that on work time? You know, people can be very pedantic, but people like clarity. Therefore, you need to make it clear and start setting the framework. And you'll see me building up this concept of a framework to enable remote working. What about when targets are missed? You know, I do say to everyone I work with, if you ever have a one-to-one or an annual review, and it isn't exactly how you expected it to go, okay, it might have been even better, but that's great. But if suddenly something comes in there and you're really shocked, you know, what, you think I'm really bad? It's not your fault, it's the managers, because they haven't been telling you all the way along that there is a concern and something needs to be done. So you could be just ticking along, working from home, and suddenly you get to your annual review and they say, well, you know, this target's been missed, you haven't been doing this. You know, you've got every reason to say, you know, you never told me. I could have changed my approach, I could have done something. Third point there is contract review. If you have members of your team that are customer facing, how do you know that they are doing their job with their customers until you get a phone call from someone saying, I'm pulling my contract, you know, you're not doing this, you haven't been servicing my needs, therefore I'm pulling it. So it could be that you think everything's fine because, you know, you're getting reports, but you haven't been managing correctly, and therefore, you know, you could be losing a contract. And the last thing that I've mentioned is new teams joined with different terms, new team members, or just general equality in the workplace. If I get on the London Tube every day and I fight the Central Line and I go to Canary Wharf if it goes there, and, you know, and I'm fighting against smelly people, coughing people, no one wearing face masks, you know, I get into the office, I'm feeling a bit fed up but that's my commute and that's what I signed up to. But I've been late for 5 minutes, you know, 5 days on the trot. Only 5 minutes, you know, I'll make it up, I'm a diligent worker. But actually you've got an attendance policy in your workplace that says actually you should be here, you know, the shop opens at 9, where were you? Therefore, as a line manager, you might say to someone, actually, you know, we're going to take you through the attendance procedure, you know, you've got these stages, or, you know, I'm going to put you on a disciplinary. However, the person at home working, she can log on whenever she wants because she's working flexibly. Or, you know, and nobody's actually sat there at 9 o'clock saying, are you on your PC, Jill? Are you working? Are you being productive? Or are you just finishing off doing the exercise program? Joe Wicks, he's a great man, but he's got a lot to answer for with everyone doing it. But, you know, is that happening? Therefore, are you being fair to those right in front of you with those who are working flexibly? So that can cause problems as well. So giving a bit of leeway in different areas then can cause problems, because if you start saying to me about attendance, I will say to you, are you checking the attendance for other people? I'm clearly obviously very shirty at the workplace, aren't I? So on those elements, these again are things for you to think about. If you have a good structure in place, effective remote working can be absolutely fabulous. So what I've done here, I'm just sharing with you the model that I use and work through when I'm working with people who either want to prevent problems or just want to consider some of the issues. Because I work with the 5 C's of remote working, thinking about culture, the contact, the care you give as an organisation, the consistency that you show with all your employees and contractors, and career as well. So I'll just skip on, and I won't cover all of these because some of them we've already looked at. Looking at the career, do you have fair and equal access to learning and development opportunities? You know, or are your staff feeling forgotten? Contact, are you holding regular one-to-ones? Are you rewarding success? You know, it's just as easy to forget to reward somebody who, or it's perhaps even easier to forget to reward somebody for their success who are further away than somebody who's in the office. You know, again, the huddle effect. Everyone step around, somebody's, you know, she's been studying on her ILM qualification and has got it today, and you all give it, you know, recognition and whatever. It's really, you know, you've got to think about it a lot harder than when you're working remotely. So think about the contact. What about your personal brand? You know, are people seeing the true you, or are they seeing you as somebody who is just sort of coming on the Zoom call, giving a few statements throughout, and that's about it? So are you able to, for people to understand who you are, what you stand for, the talent you have, the contribution you can make to other parts of the organization? As I said, corporate culture I'll cover in a tick. Care. And for that, I talk about dealing with problems. And that's not just personal problems, that's performance problems as well. Obviously, they can be linked. But ensuring that you are dealing with any performance issues as soon as they arise. When it comes to performance, the best thing to do, do something as soon as you're aware of it, so it can be resolved. You do not want to get into the situation with your teams or your staff or your co-workers that you are responsible for, where you get 6 months down the line and it's getting to be a serious problem. Therefore, the care should come in as soon as possible. And I've already mentioned loneliness and well-being. And consistency. So I talked about things like, attendance, etc. But actually being consistent with holidays, being consistent with remote requests for remote working. Different countries have different legislation about the request and the requirements. But that also links with effectively managing performance issues. And that has been a really interesting concept that I have seen during COVID, how some people feel that being unfairly treated when they have problems, whereas other people have just sort of been let off because, well, it's COVID. So ensuring that, and that's more relevant now because certainly in the UK, we are, 8 months, I don't know, it's flown by, into up and down lockdowns. So it's very important that we are effectively managing performance and we are consistent with it. So a couple of top tips that I wanted to talk about, and the first one is Zoom meetings. Now I'm sure are getting more and more used to online meetings. Just the standards of actually, a meeting when it's 11 o'clock, it starts at 11, it doesn't start at 5 past. These simple things which really can get very, very irking when, irritating when people consistently don't come online. Standards such as, we have the general etiquette. I know Maria very kindly highlighted at the start of the meeting, what would be great etiquette for us all to obey, and you're doing that now, so thank you very much. But also other standards for online meeting, such as, we know what creeping death or when we have creeping death, where I say, right, for every attendee that's on the meeting today, and that's, I think, over 100, I'm going to go back, you're going to give your viewpoint. That's going to take 3 days, isn't it? But actually, as somebody who controls a meeting, being far more resilient to either stop people and say, actually, we only have an hour, we're not going over, I need you to keep to the point. And I often say, the best way to deal in an online meeting is you make your statement of fact and then evaluate it. So people are short, to the point, and you try to stop people waffling on and on and on. So I will try and do that by saying my second thing is maxing your tech, making sure every possible tech equipment that you can use, afford as an organization is used. That includes for social and work, using tech to develop more social interrelationships within the organization, ensuring, from the basics, people have access to headphones, computers, the most upgraded systems that they can have to get it. Also supporting them with their Wi-Fi connectivity. If the only place they can work is up in the attic, giving them support to ensure that their Wi-Fi signal can reach there. But I'm sure that many of you are in the position now where you have that tech, but certainly, use as much as you can. Also, there's the use as a sort of an organization to ensure that your staff are logging on at their times of working and their work rate. There are all kinds of packages that can be used to monitor, and I use that word because we're going to have that question in a minute about monitoring and spying, to monitor the work rate of your staff so that they're working. And of course, as long as they know they're being monitored, that's all fair. Again, other top tips. Have you checked your privacy and data security? Now, depending where you are in the world, you will be covered by very different legislation. But I'll just ask you a couple of questions. are members of your team or your staff or your organization using mobile phones that haven't got the correct network on or the correct security? Are they contacting customers using their personal mobile because they might be deciding to go for, a well-being walk, and they haven't taken the work phone, they've got the personal phone. So they're now doing customer business on your phone. Have you ensured that every element of data protection is being followed by all your staff? And that's a really key issue here, because if they're using their home computer, how can you be sure that your data and your customers' data is absolutely secure? I'd also pop into that about insurance. Who owns what, and how are you ensuring that they're only using work systems for work? And the last one is starting to touch on the well-being and performance. Check and check again. Actually, just waving at someone across the office, just making sure they're okay. You can often see if there's a problem. You don't know when you're dealing with people virtually or over the phone if everything is okay, if they are struggling, if they have been upset by a customer's comments or a fellow team members. So you just have to keep checking. You need to build a different relationship when you're working online. So if you are leading a team, I'd like you to consider this. When was the last time, don't answer in the chat, but I would like you to think about it and perhaps go away with this thought. When was the last time you were in contact with your team member or even your manager? Because remember, it's just as important to manage up than manage down. When did you last say well done? How many emails have you sent in the last 5 days? And I know there was Saturday and Sunday. How many emails did you send? Were you working over the weekend? And how many of those were rushed, reverts, or task setting? So you didn't really take the time because you didn't have the time. You were just forwarding this on and saying, Freddie, can you have a look at this? Thanks, bye. I mean, I'm guilty of it, but occasionally I send a rushed email and I put from Jill in haste. And hopefully that excuses the fact that I haven't said, here I am, how are you? This is what I want. Can you do this? Are the timescales fine? By using the words in haste, which I try not to, but occasionally I do. It's kind of, I was in a rush, so here you go. But if you're doing that consistently, you need to think about your approach and think about your leadership style. So that's a bit of food for thought for you to have personally. So another quick poll, please. I want to consider the situation. It's a 5 o'clock finish in your organisation. Would you phone a team member who is working remotely at 4:50 on a Friday? Straight yes or no? And thank you. I know the team at LRBF Liam's put that up there. So it's looking a little closer than it was before. And thank you for polling this. So without skewing the vote, at the moment it's about 65-35. So we'll stop there. So 64% of you are saying yes, you would call. 36% are saying no, you wouldn't call. Now, the reason I ask that is that it's 10 to 5, perhaps in the office, people are starting to mooch about and think it's 5 o'clock, gotta go, evenings, weekend starting here. But people might feel reticent. You as a manager might worry about how that will be interpreted. Oh, it's 10 to 5. Will they think I'm spying? Is this, oh no, but I need an answer. It's only a quickie, but what if they don't answer? Do I leave a message? Will it worry them for the weekend? Well, this is about linking back with your leadership style. In fairness, I'm taking the straight approach. If somebody's employed till 5, they should be contactable. Therefore, there should be no problem. And therefore, the 61% of you that have no problem phoning at 4:50, that's exactly what you should do. So mainly because when we're looking at being a leader and working remotely, you need to use those talents differently. So you need to set that scene. I've started building up the pitch of setting a sort of a standard, making sure people know that what's expected, because you need to use your talents differently. You need to learn how to be a different manager or leader when people are remote working. But you have to also accept it takes time to lead and manage. It's not a switch overnight. And I think many of us have found that, perhaps we've been tripped up by some of the things we've said or some of the, the interpretations that we've had. It does take time to get used to working with a remote team. you do need time to plan and time to manage, and you need to plan that management. So you need to actually put in your diary that you're going to ensure that you speak to every member of your team, say at least twice a week, and it's going to be quality, a good sort of 10-15 minutes. You're going to plan that you don't always send reverts. You're going to plan that you're going to do something as a team that might work or might not. We try everything, don't we? We might have a fun slot, we might have somebody coming on at the start of the meeting to share fun facts, I don't know. We might have a virtual birthday party, might have celebrations, but you need to plan that in. And again, you may need to include that client, because let's not forget, many of us work in client-facing businesses, and you need to ensure when they are working remotely, you are in contact, or you understand that that relationship is still working very well. So for those 61% of you, hurrah, because monitoring is not spying. If you set a framework and say to people, look, I am expecting you to still work till this time, then that is absolutely fine. A good way is to set that framework and say to them, this is the attendance that you need to be contactable. If you're leaving your desk to go and get a cup of tea, put an out of office on, or on your voicemail, you say, I am still working. This might have to, you might have to change it several times a day, but it only takes a couple of seconds to say, I'm currently away from my desk, but I am working today. I'm going to be back at a certain time. Using your calendar to say, actually, I'm going to have a fixed lunch break at 1 o'clock and I'm not going to be contactable. So therefore, if a manager's calling you, it's their own fault, because don't expect an answer if we've told you that it's not going to be there. Keep a system of monitoring those relationships. And again, use technology. It depends on the nature of your work and your working environment as to which tech you use. If it's an output related system, then actually some of the systems that monitor productivity may well work for you. Some organizations have a very popular system in the United States, where random screenshots are taken of you during the day to prove you're at your workspace. While we might find that a bit horrifying, actually, if you're used to it, then that's absolutely fine. That might be the system that works for you. But if, it might also be to say that, look, I'm not going to monitor you during the day. That's fine. You're a senior manager, just get on with your work. But you must still tell me when you're not going to be there. So I'm not wasting my time calling you, and I'm not getting, the same old answer message that we can't get through to. So a couple of lessons from COVID as we sort of move into the last couple of minutes, and then I'd love to hear any questions that you've got. And I want to link this particularly with the C-TRIP data. Almost overnight, we unlocked sort of the ability to work from home, or for many of us, the lack of ability to work from home, because it was a real struggle in the early weeks, access to tech. I'm really sorry, but that's my doorbell, which I thought was turned off, and you're going to have to hear Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. So I'm just going to put you on mute for 3 seconds. In fact, I will tell you the background of that story. We had a doorbell put in last Christmas, put on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer carol, and after Christmas, nobody could find the instructions to change it. So all the year we have that. So if you had that rendition, I do apologise, and what a fine example of working from home that is. So back to the professional seminars, some lessons from COVID. Overnight, we unlocked the ability to work it, and many are seeing the benefits of saving and flexibility, particularly those that work and commute into a city, saving on transport, parking, not going on the central line, etc. All of that is very key. However, this was not a choice, was it? Some of us went home on a Thursday, and by Friday we were told, don't come back into the office, somebody's going to send your PC to you. Many people do not have facilities for working from home, and have been struggling on in their bedroom. And I move on to the sort of the concept of inequality. You haven't got the space, you haven't got the ability to juggle where you do your work, and that makes it really difficult. Working in your bedroom every day, you've got to get up, clear away, make sure it's fine for the people behind you. You also have constant disturbances if you're not used to working from home. I'm used to working from home, and still I had a disturbance from my doorbell. But also a real lesson has been the lessons from COVID, the ability or lack of experience of dealing with personal issues. Because people have become a lot more visible. Their personal surroundings have become a lot more visible. And so for some people that just came to work, didn't often share, you can see perhaps they might have more difficulties from home that you appreciated, but also they're struggling with the isolation. And it's very hard, if you're not experienced in that, to know how to help or where to turn to help. If people have been, suffered a bereavement, at a time where, bereavement when you're isolated is considerably harder. So it's hard if you haven't had that experience or you just don't know where to go. And also inequalities of treatment of members. I've heard some interesting tales of people who aren't expected to work because they're shielding. So they are able to work, but they just can't leave their space. That's happened in the United Kingdom, with people who are still working from home but not shielding. Well, surely there's an ability all around to understand the extent of working that can be done. So we've seen many elements of that. And that links back to the C-TRIP experiment. 50% of those people who said, I want to work from home, returned to work after 9 months. And many of them said it was the isolation that did it. So therefore, when we have people from working from home, let's not draw on a lot of the negatives we've had from the COVID experience, because that hasn't been people that have self-selected. Also, it was done in a bit of a rush, and it's also been done in an environment that has been very testing for everybody during the pandemic around the world. So I would like to bear that, if you're thinking about more people working flexibly or remotely, don't just look at some of the elements that have come back out from COVID, learn from those and use those experience to make it work for as many who want it. So moving forward, just again, a couple of pause for thoughts. This might impact city waitings. If you have people not coming into your office, you may decide not to give them. And you might worry that that makes you unattractive as an employer. So again, bear that in mind. Now, I've given HASWA Act. Now, this is a United Kingdom Act, Health and Safety of Work Act. And the reason I've put it on is because, like many countries, we have health and safety at work. This is absolutely groundbreaking act in the safety of workers. But it's only now that the focus on the health of workers is coming to the fore. And for that, I'm talking about mental health working, mental well-being and physical well-being. When you can't see people, are you ensuring that you are maintaining that and not contributing to a deterioration in it? Think about home insurance. Really simple. I've got this fantastic computer that's been provided to me by my employer and I've broken it. Is it the employer's responsibility to fix it, or does it come under the home insurance if I'm broken into? In England and Wales, most home insurance companies just extended, if you had house insurance, they said any work equipment in your building, in your house during COVID, we will cover. But that's not going to go on. So, again, think about that. But significantly, think about the homework distinction. And for that, I say, if you're going to have teams that are going to work remotely, working on the kitchen table is not a working environment. If I come to you and say, this is what I'd like to do, this is my plan, and you say, yes, we can work around that, this is how I'm going to manage you, I need to show to you that I'm going to be working in a professional manner. And the kitchen table, in the same way that the way we've made people work in their bedrooms, because it's the best table and whatever, that's not sustainable. And that is not going to make a great flexible and working relationship in the future. So people should have a dedicated area where they can work, where they're not going to have the doorbell ringing, where they're not going to be disturbed by other people. So think about that element, please. Ask yourself, are you monitoring attendance, work rates, stress, happiness? I want to be happy in my work, and I want to make sure that things that are done to me by those around me do not diminish that. And the equality. And as we move on to the last couple of slides, get into great habits. I've talked about standards, setting expectations, tell people what you want them to do and how you want to do them. Look at the last point, ask the team for their ideas. What could make this work for us as a team? Make sure we reiterate our values, create water cooler moments, create that huddle opportunity that started the conversation between C-TRIP and Stanford, that actually started what is now a far greater working from home experiment at trip.com. use message groups for work and non, and do fun stuff. Because, you know, I love fun. Most people love fun. In its element, in a small amount of work, it is really important to make the workplace as fun as it can be. And do think about those 5 C's and the areas that we have. So thank you for that. I'd love to hear some questions. And just to sort of recap, I've given you some academic evidence about increasing productivity. I've signposted you to, if you're interested in reading a good conglomerate report on a lot of the evidence about that, it's in the references at the end of this. But also some top tips for you working remotely, and also if you're managing. As I mentioned, there's an ebook you can have, more than free, it's free, so that can be sent to you. That was a managing remote work during COVID, but does actually apply at any other stage as well. It was just relevant at that very time that people needed a bit of support. And also, you know, I do always recommend having a few TED Talks. There are a couple on the slides there. That's from Nicholas Bloom, who did the C-Trip experiment, and also a really interesting one, why work doesn't happen at work, why you can recreate those huddle moments in other areas. So perhaps, Maria, if we've had any questions come in, you know, perhaps if I can hand back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jill. It was absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure the topic is very close to all of us. So indeed, there's been a lot of interest. I've been monitoring the chat. We have maybe starting with the very first question, and I believe this referred to the C-Trip, the Bloom et al. 2015 work.
Yeah.
So at some stage, you mentioned that turnover was reduced by some 50%.
Yeah.
And so a question from Eileen, by turnover, do you mean staff turnover reduced or sales for that business?
Oh, I'm so sorry I didn't get it clear. I also have notes on the experiment just to my side. No, it was staff turnover. As I said, as with all academics reports, there's a few, you know, asterisks there. So do bear in mind the people that did it had been working for over 6 months, so they already had an establishment with them. But staff turnover, attrition of the staff reduced by 50%. Thank you for asking for clarity on that.
Okay. So next one is from Nicola. There are many roles that in the office are not monitored for hours worked or productivity. Yeah. What benefit will it bring to introduce software tech to do this for those that work from home?
Great question. The reason I touched on software tech is that for some jobs, it is important to monitor, and that could be appropriate. But you should only be looking at the tech that's suitable for you. I mean, in the work that I do in business and academia, I mean, it would be pointless if I was on a contract with someone and they were taking snapshots. Who knows what they would see? But it's only really but there's tech out there for most areas. Like all markets, if there's a need, there is a product. So you know, it really does just depend on the job, the role, and whether it's appropriate.
Okay, now the next one is from John. He'd like to have some advice for workers whose roles mean that they have to prove their competence under a regulatory regime.
Okay, well, I mean, if you're proving your competence under a regulatory regime, either you have to show that you're doing a certain amount of work, which you can by recording when you're working on whatever. But also, I'd imagine your competence is proved normally by the output of the work you do and the quality of the work you do, and of course, in some cases, particularly banking, you know, qualifications and continuing professional development. So I think that's more about the standard of work you're doing. Unless I've misinterpreted it.
Okay, thank you. Next one from Vinci. What would you suggest will be the best way to phase back to office when COVID is over? Shall it still be come back as you wish, or by time X you have to be back to office for at least 50% of the time?
Well, I mean, I suppose it depends on your organisation. I mean, I believe for many jobs, there is no reason to have even to do 4 days in one. You can just work remotely, but there does have to be contact time. So if we look at some of the examples, such as the US Patents Office, you know, they have lots of team get-togethers where people actually have that physical couple of days where they see each other, they discuss, or away days. And it's about using that because, you know, if you get rid of your officers as an organisation, you're saving an awful lot of money. But that money shouldn't just go onto the bottom line. Some of that should be spent on ensuring everyone has the right kit, ensuring that there's good contact, and also that there is the sort of the social element and you know, conferences, etc. So it's using that, I think, is important.
Okay, next one from Christian. What do you think the impact of employees' work-life balance is by working from home?
Well, by impact, I think, actually, no, I believe that during sort of these few months, people have had a greater understanding of perhaps both themselves and those they're working with. I think the insight into, you know, not just having a look at, you know, oh, look, Jill's got a bookcase there. And, you know, people are always commenting on odd things that appear on my shelf that I fail to clear when I'm having informal meetings. But I think they've also had an insight to the sort of the more sympathetic, more understanding. And actually, you know, perhaps we'd got too much into the habit of you know, sort of automatons. We go to work, we just get on the work, we have a bit of a social once a week or once a month, and then we go home. So I think we may well become a nicer working society because of that understanding. I really hope so. And certainly, even after 7 months of working remotely for a lot of people, you know, just trying to not get fed up that, you know, Jill has again not activated her camera in a meeting, and actually understanding maybe Jill doesn't want you to see what's happening, or she, you know, there might be somebody in the background or somebody else working, and there might be reasons for that. Particularly, you know, there's a lot of evidence for the under 25s do not want to be on camera because they've become very camera conscious. Students particularly, which of course, you know, we have some older students as well as younger, but there's evidence about young students and those under the age of 20 who actually spend more time looking at themselves, thinking everyone can see me looking like this, rather than concentrating on what's going on. Therefore, it's best just to tell them all not to have their cameras on.
So there's a related one from Scott. A lot has been made of the hybrid model of working, with staff splitting time between the office and work from home environments. So what are your thoughts on this? Is it a good compromise, or is it neither here nor there and leaves folks in limbo?
Well, if we have a hybrid model, the downside to that is when it's not controlled and people come in on sort of different days. And then that's where the limbo comes in, because you don't know, you know, if you actually want to see someone and have a physical meeting, you know, there's all kinds of arrangements going on. I do believe in all or nothing, but the one caveat around there is the return to the office. You know, I've certainly experienced when working in an office, the person that works remotely comes in, spends half the day chit-chatting with everyone as they walk up, you know, long lunch, then has to leave because the motorways get busy at 5 o'clock. And we're all sat there going, well, he's done nothing all day. So it's also managing those return to, if it's an occasional return, just managing those as well. Again, setting the standard that's fair for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So this one is a comment, but I think it will also be useful to hear your thoughts, Jill. This is from Phil. All the problems Jill is describing seem to boil down to bad management, bad leadership. This is evident because, it seems to me, the 5 C's all apply equally to non-remote working. This implies there's no true difference between remote working. The top tips are valuable because they draw awareness to what managers should be doing anyway, but may have forgotten.
Okay, well, that's a very a good point, a frank point. What I'd say to that is, when we look at the 5 C's, it's a slightly different lens. If we take on the concept of culture, you know, we define our culture as sort of the values, artifacts, the way we deal with people. When somebody is not part of that on a day-to-day basis, how do they feel part of that culture? So it's the different lens, and obviously I didn't go into it all in a vast amount of detail, but it's how we apply those specifically. And, you know, just because it's not down to bad leadership. Often we don't know how to lead when we're working remotely. So it's understanding, you know, I did say thinking about the way you lead in a different manner. You know, it could be fine when you're in the office to walk past and say, oh, could you do that report by 5? But, perhaps somebody getting an email, they'll go, well, they don't understand. I've got all these other emails coming in. Where if it was said, as they walk past, you could say, actually, I've got something else to deal with, and, can we do it another time? So it's all about just, using those leadership skills that we have, but in a slightly different way.
So we've reached the end of our seminar today. I understand there are a couple of questions we have not been able to cover, but
Okay.
you'll be happy to get back to them later.
Of course I will. Of course I will.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And I would like to think that with today's well in excess of 200 participants, we have clearly contributed to your aim, which was to have helped 10,000 workers by 2022.
Yay.
So
thank you very much. And thank you to everyone at LIBF for facilitating this.
Thank you very much, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed the seminar. Thanks, everyone, again. Stay safe, stay well.